the Treaty of Amiens. It was signed on the 25th of March 1802, came into effect on the 27th of March, and lasted until the 18th of May 1803, so for 14 months. And it was the only time of general peace in Europe in these 14 months between 1793, around the time of the French Revolution, and 1814, the Battle of Waterloo. And it ended the wars of the Second Coalition, and one big thing was that Britain accepted France now as a republic after the French Revolution. And there were some people signing it. It was for Britain, was it the Marquis of Cornwallis? For France, it was Joseph Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. For the Batavian Republic, that is somewhere where Belgium and the Netherlands are, the Batavian Republic, Rutger Jan Schimmelpenninck, and for Spain, José Nicolás César. And why was it made? Now, there were also humanitarian reasons. The Marquis of Cornwallis, for example, said that he didn't want to have continuous, helpless bloodshedding, for example. Or another thing was that the Prime Minister for domestic issues in Britain had changed in 1801 from William Pitt the Younger to Henry Edding. Now the people were starting to talking about how the treaty could be. And it wasn't going so well. The Batavian Republic is here written and quoted then that they were seen by the French. There was a lack of respect for them, that were seen as vanquished and conquered, and that they owned France everything. And also, Lord Cornwallis wrote that he wrote, "I feel it as the most unpleasant circumstance attending this unpleasant business that, after I have obtained his acquaintance on any point, that I can have no confidence that it is finally settled, and that he will not recede from it in our next conversation about Joseph Bonaparte." Now it was talking there. Was it Lord Hawkesbury on the British side, with Louis Guillaume Otto on the French side, the French Commissioner of War in London? But Louis Guillaume Otto was detailing the instructions of Napoleon, and so then Lord Hawkesbury opened the second line of communication with sending Anthony Merritt to Paris to talk in the second line of communication with Talleyrand, Charles-Marie Talleyrand. And when we're talking, and then there were some things happening, why they had to sign now under pressure. And Britain was talking about the budget in the parliament. It's not said explicitly here, but it must be about on what money to spend in the next year, on military, if wars continued or not. And there was a huge pressure on Lord Cornwallis to sign or to not sign, which Lord Cornwallis seemed to not want, because he wanted peace. And during the peace, these 40 months, Britain then kept its large peacetime army. They did not demobilize of 180,000, I think, was it, troops. And also they used that year to build up the navy. And then they had given Lord Hawkesbury an ultimatum to sign, and then they're talking about Malta. Malta was the big issue. Who got Malta? It seemed to have been part of St. John's Holy Knights order, and then it became occupied by France. But then during the war, Britain had got it in. It was in the hands of Britain. And then we were talking about that, and then Lord Hawkesbury got an ultimatum to sign, and after then, shortly after the ultimatum had run out, after a 5-hour-long meeting, Lord Hawkesbury signed. And he said he was worried and unhappy with the treaty, but he also was not happy that the war would go on and it would be just hopeless, useless bloodshed. About the signing of this preliminary agreement, which was done then, there was a great joy in Europe. There were poems written in the languages German, English, French. And on the stage, people were acting it out, and fireworks were done in Britain. In Britain, the people hoped that the income tax, which had been imposed a few years earlier, would be gone away, that the market had a revival, and that the grain prices would go down. Some reasons for making the treaty were also on Britain's side, that they feared war with Russia, and that they wanted more trading with Europe. And now it was signed, and the people waited for it, wanted it. And another reason was that the mood was a bit changing in Britain about some people who wanted peace. Now read about the things which were happening in Europe with Napoleon, and they read about it in newspapers, more strong moralizing colors. It's written like that here. And that made the people who wanted peace also turn away. Lord Hawkesbury also saw that is what he saw. And so he had a pressure to come to peace before the public opinion would change. It was happening that France was involving stronger in the Batavian Republic. France was supporting a French general with a revolutionary coup d'etat, and also, I don't know something else, but that was. And they read about it and they saw that France was having influence, and that's also why the pressure to make that peace now. When the peace was, after some time it was then signed also the actual treatment. It was made 2 days later an addendum when saying that it was not, that it should not set a precedent, that it was written only in English and French and not in Dutch probably and in Spanish of the other signatory parties, that should not set a precedent for future contracts or treaties. And also then that some titles were said wrong, that is not part because of prejudice or something. Now some things were done about the Cape Colony in South Africa, who got it, about Malta, that it stays a bit longer British, but that Britain should retreat when other things with Trinidad should become a part of Britain. That was allowed to Spain. Spain's allegiance with France came a bit under pressure during the time. One reason was that Spain wanted that, or had hoped that France would block that Trinidad, an island in the Caribbean, would not become British, which France didn't block. And now Spain, for example, the economy in Spain is recovered during that time, for example. Now, and then there was this 14 months of peace, and traveling in Europe started again. Expatriates came back to France now under released restrictions who had fled during the French Revolution or something. And people also came, some people named here the name. William Herschel, for example, went to the Observatoire in Paris probably to make astronomy or something. And Marie Tussaud got to London and opened the second exhibition as Marie Tussaud, so she had in Paris. Or André Jacquanier went also to London and flew with a hot air balloon from London to Colchester in 45 minutes. And there was in the Louvre in Paris the Exposition des Produits Français de l'Industrie or something. And Napoleon, the private secretary of Napoleon, said then that Napoleon was above all delighted about the numerous foreigners who expressed their delight about the exhibition. But it was not all perfectly. There were some problems. Malta was a big problem all the time. Now, but also other diplomatic problems. Britain felt insulted that France or Napoleon said that Britain had no voice in Europe. And also should Britain censor the anti-British press. And also should they expel and expatriate people who had gotten there. Expel them. And Britain saw this as an affront against their sovereignty. And King George III, I think was also an elector of a Holy Roman Empire. This is where Germany is. And they felt insulted for that. Then more things. Napoleon had made the Treaty of Lunéville a year earlier to the Treaty of Amiens. Britain had not signed it. Napoleon had signed it, and in that he had said that he would not accept the presidency of the Italian Republic in northern Italy, which he then did, and he became the president of northern Italy. And also sent troops into the Helvetic Republic in Switzerland and occupied it. And also a stronger influence than more on the Netherlands. And he dispatched naval ships or something, to regain revolutionary Haiti in the Caribbean. And also to take control again or still, of French Louisiana. Louisiana was then sold by Napoleon to the United States, to the Thomas Jefferson administration. Other things which Napoleon also did was to make the Napoleonic Codes with the Concordat. He made peace with the Vatican. That was one thing said, for example, in the treaty, that he should retreat from the Kingdom of Naples and from the Papal State and from Egypt also. That has been also a big issue when the treaty breaks down. So Napoleon made the Concordat to make peace with the Vatican, the Napoleonic Code, with that he did something, and also a new constitution. A new Napoleonic Code making a new legal system in France, and a new constitution with which he became emperor of lifetime. Now, and when these were the promises. So Britain saw themselves threatened, insulted, and also threatened on the global stage by France's imperialistic actions which they did. and also that they had nothing to say in Europe, and that France was not holding to the Treaty of Luneville, but they attacked Switzerland and accepted the presidency of Italy. And we saw that France was weak. Britain kept a large peacetime war army and did not demobilize and built out its navy. And when the war started again, Britain was in the Battle of Trafalgar very quickly able to regain an upper hand on the oceans with the Battle of Trafalgar a bit later. And they saw that France was in a weakened position also. And now, then there became more diplomatic problems. So Britain saw it, what all was happening in Europe with Napoleon, and then they seized on the Malta issue. It's written like that. They seized on the Malta issue. They had signed in the treaty that they would retreat from Malta within 3 months, and they didn't do it. And Napoleon pressed them on it. He published a report in which he stated how easily he could regain Egypt or take Egypt. That was something similar which he did. And then also later he said then to Lord Whitworth, which was the British-French ambassador, in an interview that Britain should retreat from Malta, and he threatened war. And Lord Whitworth felt like he had gotten an ultimatum that war would come if not Britain would go away. And so he said how easy he could get Egypt, and that he would have war if Britain would not retreat. Britain was seeing that he was having actions in Switzerland, in the Helvetic Republic, in the Batavian Republic, with the influence on Netherlands or whatever it is, Belgium. I don't know if just what it takes. And these things. And then it got more and more. Then Napoleon said then also in a public meeting again, where other people were there, pressured he again onto Malta. And that saw now the Russian ambassador, Markov, and he reported then back to Russia, to the Tsar, that France was threatening. And also did he report then back to Russia that France was, rumors that France would had taken an eye on Hanover and on Hamburg in northern Western Germany. And following that, then the Russians accumulated, assembled troops in the Baltic because of the threats of Napoleon then to Western Germany, because Russia saw it as now that would now be part of their business if Napoleon would be doing something then in Western Germany. It was not Germany at the time. And then Britain made an ultimatum to France, and saying that France would retreat from Switzerland and something else, and that Malta would be staying part of Britain for 10 more years. Napoleon said then that he would accept the Ottoman Empire's, so that Turkey is, the Ottoman Empire's integrity. That had probably something to do with Egypt, that he would not attack Egypt again. The British troops were also, there was war led something. I don't know, just from this article. But he did not accept that on Malta. And when it got worse, they were talking again under big pressure that war was imminent. And then on the 17th May, then Britain seized all the ships, all the French and Dutch ships in the ports and at the coast. On the 18th May, then war was declared on France, naming the region as reason the hostile actions against the Empire, the West Indies, and Britain. And then on the 18th May, war was declared again. France then also arrested all male British people. Some were taken as prisoner for over 10 years then, until all the wars, the Napoleonic Wars, had ended. And then the war got on again. This time Austria and Russia joined the coalition against France. And at that time also, shortly before the war started, France was again making signs that they would attack Britain again. Now here's the text that is written like that. Napoleon didn't feel ready to attack again, to make war again. So he showed signs that he was preparing again an invasion of Britain. It never happened that Napoleon invaded Britain, but he had made preparations early or something. And now he made signs that he would do it again. When the seizing all Dutch and French ships, I don't even know if that news made it to Napoleon. So and then one day later on the 18th, then declaration of war against France. France arresting then all the people who were English, how big of an impact it was, it's not really here. And when in secret the Grand Army of Napoleon was marched away from France, from Normandy, where we were assembling to pretend that we would attack England, to Ulm and defeating there the Austrian army. And then one day later is the Battle of Trafalgar, where Britain wins with the ships against Admiral Nelson against Spain and France. But then the next battle comes at Austerlitz, and where Napoleon wins then, but the wars go on for about 10 years. And then there is the Battle of Waterloo then in 1814, and where Napoleon is then defeated. And the Treaty of Amiens are these 14 months in between these 30 years of war in Europe. And that is according to the Wikipedia article of the Treaty of Amiens, but the views and positions mentioned here in the article don't necessarily align with my own or with the entities spoken of. I'm Rebecca. I'm trying to learn history today with the Treaty of Amiens. And after we've done it, we're gonna do extensor kappa and now strength training. And if you participate in the extensor kappa and now strength training, then it's at your own risk. And we're already 25 parts in, and we are now on the 4 or 5 pages, and we're gathering together informations we have, what you want to say in our little presentation or big presentation about the Treaty of Amiens. And we now at the breakdown. Now here said that Britain wasn't so happy with many things. For example, Napoleon was using the time while the Treaty of Amiens was lasting from March 1802 until May 1803, so these 14 months. What happened there, for example, America came under pressure for its isolation, also a bit because we are on remote trading. It's not really said why now, but they came under pressure, but it's said here. That is one thing with America. Then another thing was that the United States of America, were purchasing Louisiana for France, the lending for it money by British banks. Then also, I think it was someone said that it had also consequences for America to lend so much money. Okay, for Britain used the time to build up its navy. The people expected with great celebration and great hope the starting to came into effect of the Treaty of Amiens, the signing of it, because they hoped that by the winning the Pitt, the predecessor, what is it called, the person before Henry Eddington, who was Prime Minister, then the income tax would be taken away, was not. They hoped that the grain prices come down. Britain used the time to build up the navy when in 1803 the hostilities started again with France. They were able to quickly gain the upper hand on the sea. France used the time. Napoleon introduced the Napoleonic Code, which is a new legal system. He made peace with Vatican with the Concordat. He made a new constitution giving him the power for lifetime. The other countries was not much written. France, and then the next thing which France was doing, it was reordering the international system in Switzerland, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands. Which is then here listed as the next thing of why the Treaty of Amiens didn't hold and the war got on for the next 12 years. Now, France was intervening in Switzerland, Germany, Italy, and Netherlands. That is one thing. Britain was irritated in particular by Napoleon's assertion of control over Switzerland. The next reason is that Britain felt insulted for Napoleon stating that they have no voice in Europe. King George III was an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. And Russia also saw the way Napoleon, so the French Napoleon, was intervening in Switzerland, that France or Napoleon wasn't searching for peaceful resolution, not for war, and then later on it followed actually the war with Russia. And Britain was laboring under a sense of loss of control as well as loss of markets. Napoleon was a possible threat to the overseas colonies of Britain. One person argues that Britain had a mixture of economic motives and national neurosis, an irrational anxiety about Napoleon's motives and intentions. However, in the long run, Napoleon's intentions were hostile to British national interests. And then the next reason why not to start the war in 1803 again was Napoleon was not ready for the war, making it seem an optimal time for Britain to try to stop him. Britain therefore seized upon the Malta issue by refusing to follow the terms of the Treaty of Amiens that required its allocation of the islands. The Malta and some other islands Malta goes on Comino. They also become, again was written in the Treaty of Amiens, part of Knights Hospitaller and neutral. In the preliminary agreement it was agreed that two of his powers would agree with safety. So Malta would become neutral, Britain would go away, and Malta became again St. John's Order, Hospitaller Knight Order, and neutral. Britain was not retreating, so therefore pressuring on that the Treaty of Amiens breaks down. Napoleon's determination to exclude Britain from the continent now and bring it to its knees in the future made war inevitable. So another historian argues here, the British government balked at implementing certain terms of a treaty, such as evacuating the naval presence from Malta. After the initial fervour, objections to the treaty quickly grew in Britain, where it seemed to the governing class that they were making all the concessions and ratifying recent developments. Prime Minister Eddington did not undertake military demobilization but maintained a large peacetime army of 100,000 AD. So Britain was building up a navy, and also they were not doing demobilization during the 1 year of peace. They stayed all the people, 180,000, ready in arms. Now here was written that one person argues that France tried to exclude Britain from the continent to bring it to its knee in the future. Actions taken by Bonaparte after the treaty was signed heightened tensions with Britain. He used the time of peace to consolidate power and reorganize domestic administration in France and some of its client states. His effective annexation of the Cisalpine Republic and his decision to send French troops into the Helvetic Republic in Switzerland was another violation of the Treaty of Lunéville. Okay, there was then another treaty, the Treaty of Lunéville. It was not explained what it is. In January 1802, that was before the treaty was signed. But then again here in October, that was why the treaty was signed. So in January 1802, Napoleon traveled to Lyon to accept the presidency of the Italian Republic, a nominally independent client republic that covered northern Italy and had been established in 1797. The act violated the Treaty of Lunéville, in which Bonaparte agreed to guarantee the independence of the Italian and other client republics. Okay, there were Italian and client republics, for example, in Italy or France. It's not explained yet. Or France probably. And that we would be independent. Already before the war, the treaty was signed while the war was lasting. He accepted the presidency of the Italian Republic, breaking that Treaty of Lunéville. And now, while the treaty was lasting, he sent consolidated power and reorganized, sent troops to Switzerland in violation of the Treaty of Lunéville. Britain had not signed the Treaty of Lunéville. And the power that signed it tolerated Napoleon's actions. Tsar Alexander had just congratulated Bonaparte for withdrawing from there and other places, but the Swiss move increased the belief in his cabinet that Bonaparte was not to be trusted. Okay, the Russians, so the Tsar Alexander was congratulating Bonaparte for removing troops from Switzerland. Now he was moving again in, and now Russia and the cabinet of the Tsar believed that Bonaparte was not looking for permanent peace. Bonaparte made British progress over the action of belligerent statements, again denying Britain's right to be formally involved in matters on the continent, pointing out that Switzerland had been occupied by French troops when the treaty was signed. So Britain was protesting against the French troops in Switzerland. Bonaparte said that Britain had nothing to say in Europe, and that we were already aware when the treaty was signed. He also demanded for the British government to censor the strongly anti-French British press and to expel British expatriates from British soil. Those demands were perceived in London as a affront to British sovereignty. Okay, he demanded to censor anti-French newspapers or press and to expel the French expatriates from British soil, so people who have left France, to expel them. And the British blockade was loosed, and France used it to dispatch a naval expedition to regain control over revolutionary Haiti and to occupy French Louisiana. Those moves, though not in violation of the treaty, were perceived by the British as a willingness by Bonaparte to threaten them on a global stage. French Louisiana. Is it the same as the Louisiana purchase to the Thomas Jefferson Democratic Republic administration? Maybe. Okay, France used the time to regain control over Haiti and French Louisiana. Britain saw this that Bonaparte was looking permanently not for peace. Britain was not removing the troops from Egypt and Malta. Egypt should have been in the preliminary agreement restored to the Ottoman Empire. So France had troops there, and they should give it to the Ottoman Empire. Probably had France troops there, and Britain also. So I think Britain and France were fighting there in Egypt, in a country which should have been restored in the preliminary agreement to the Ottoman Empire, so Turkey. Bonaparte published with which France might capture Egypt. Okay, Bonaparte put out a report how he might capture Egypt. In an interview February 1803 with Lord Whitworth, Bonaparte threatened war if Malta was not evacuated, and implied that he could have already retaken Egypt. So he was saying if Britain was not going away from Malta and make it neutral as it was signed, then he threatened with war, and that he could have already retaken Egypt. And it left Lord Whitworth feeling as if he had been given an ultimatum. A month later, Bonaparte again pressed Whitworth, implying that the British wanted war since they were not upholding the treaty obligations, and saying that Britain wanted war because they didn't go away from Malta and make it neutral. The encounter was reported back to Russia through the Russian ambassador in stark terms. The implicit and explicit threats contained in the exchange may have played a role in Russia's eventual entry into the Third Coalition. And that is it. And now this is why we're talking about Russia. Russia entered when the Third Coalition, logically, the Second Coalition came to an end. The war of the Second Coalition were ended with the Treaty of Amiens. And now the Third Coalition was against France, the French France, and this time Russia was also fighting against France. The Russian ambassador Morokov also reported rumors that Bonaparte would seize Hamburg as well as Hanover if war was renewed. Okay, there were rumors that Bonaparte would attack Hamburg and Hanover, today in Germany. Although the Tsar of Russia wanted to avoid war, that news apparently forced his hand. He began collecting troops at the Baltic coast in late March. The Russian foreign minister wrote of the situation, the intention already expressed by the First Council of striking blows against England. The intention already expressed by the First Council, I don't know what it is, of striking blows against England wherever he can, and under the pretext of sending his troops into Hanover, Northern Germany, so we're talking about Bonaparte, entirely transforms the nature of his war as it relates to our interests and obligations. Okay. France was explicitly and implicitly saying that we're going to attack Hanover and Hamburg, and that was one reason why now Russia was collecting troops in the Baltic. So that's pretty far still in the north, far away of France and Germany also. It was then the Holy Roman Empire. Collecting troops because they're seeing an intention to go into Hanover and Northern Germany, Hamburg. Hanover is also in Northern Germany, as against their interests and obligations. Now, we don't have time left. If you were here for the Treaty of Amiens, you can come back to the next part, where we're going to read the rest. And when we're going to go a bit over it again, when we have all informations together, which I repeated in these information I want to save it, going to go one more time over it, and then we try to make our big presentation about the Treaty of Amiens. If you stay and participate in our short and extensive governance strength training, that's what you ask. What is David Sands? Hands up and down. And fists, and down, up. And now you can use a soccer t-shirt or a tennis ball, not a tennis ball, a soccer towel or t-shirt. Down, press onto it equally with all 5 fingers. Up. Again down, and up. the other hand, press down. 3 rules. First rule, if there's pain, stop immediately. Second rule, go only as far as you can go with a little bit of effort. And now hold, and go to the outside. And third rule, we don't want to overdo it. We just want to strengthen, not to exhaust. In, our hand, press, in, and out. In. Golden standstill. And press like that, and down. Up. And with the other hand, press down. And now just hold and press in neutral position. Alright? And that was the extensor cover and I strengthened. I thank you very much and until next time.